Hey, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of all the books I read in February. So for the month of February, I was participating in Blackathon, which is a readathon started and hosted by Jesse of Bowties and Books. They did so much work in creating amazing prompts for this readathon, so I'm going to go ahead and leave them in the description below because every day and every month is a great month to read books that are centering Black authors and Black protagonists. Let's hop right in. The first book I read, which was actually before February, was Felix Ever After. I really enjoyed this book. I thought the protagonist was very compelling. A lot of internal conflict that really drove the story. There was also a lot of external conflict as far as like cyberbullying, in-person bullying, and all kind of centered around Felix's trans identity, just figuring out what that was, what the label was, placed in the community, all that sort of stuff. And I really, really liked the thematic ideas around it's okay to not know exactly what your label is, and it's okay to not know what your label is immediately. I'm a Black bisexual woman, and I love seeing LGBTQ plus protagonists in stories, especially when they're Black, and Felix was definitely a character that I felt like I could root for. I did feel a little annoyed that Felix was so interested in getting to like this high level like art school. I'm like, you don't need all that. Like, it's like brand name education. Other than that, it was a really good book, especially to see kind of interplay between different identities in the LGBTQ plus community. It's important that we are all supporting each other in the community, and we especially have to look out for trans individuals, especially trans individuals of color. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I was a little stressed by the cyberbullying, but I think it was very effective. And I think that's why it was stressful, because cyberbullying is stressful. So the next book I've already talked about a little bit before, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I love this book. I could talk about it so much, honestly, because it is so good. So Legendborn is kind of a magic, fantasy, dark academia type vibe book. It is about Bree Matthews, and she's going to an early college program, and there are some mysterious circumstances around the death of her mother, and she's going to investigate that and see what's going on, and that's kind of where things kind of go from there. I love this book for so many reasons. First of all, Bree is a great protagonist. She's believable as a teenager, but she's also not annoying. I also loved that she really goes on a growth arc throughout the story, and Tracy Deonn has a lot in common with her protagonist as far as having the death of her mother, and that authenticity really shows in the book. It shows grief in a complex way that makes Bree more well-rounded as a person. I also loved the type of magic in the book. So some fantasy books are kind of more of a all-encompassing fantasy world, kind of like Raybearer, where everything is fantasy, everything is magic, everyone knows about the magic, even if they're not a magical person, which I love. But I also love what we have in Legendborn, where there's a magical world, but only the magical people can see it. There's also different types of magic that not necessarily all the magic people know about as well. I also loved how Black ancestry was tied into this book. So the setting of the book, the non-magical setting, is North Carolina, University of North Carolina, and it just really dived into history of universities and just history of the South, the United States South, and just the United States in general, let's be real here. And it just really tied the magic and the lore into that history as well in a really cool way. The other characters were really great too. So like I said, I love to see queer Black people in stories. I love to see queer Black people just living their lives, having a great time. And I think that fantasy is one of the best ways where you can see kind of like people in a way where you can really idealize them. Like, we deserve to have idealized versions of ourselves too, if that makes sense. I really love that. There's also a non-binary character in this story. I don't think I've read a fantasy book with a non-binary character before. So if you know of other fantasy books with non-binary characters, because I know there have to be more, then leave them in the comment section below. Let me know why you liked it and why I should check it out. I also really liked, there's two characters that are kind of presented as, I don't know if foils to each other is the right way, but there's two main male characters, and I really like how they kind of explore different aspects of masculinity. There's also queer men characters in this story, which I think is very important because sometimes bisexual men get left out when we're talking about queerness in stories or just in general. Like, some people still think bisexual men don't exist. I don't know why they still think that, but they do. So anyway, it's good to see that representation in this book as well. I could go on and on about Legendborn for so long. If you, like I, loved Legendborn, you should check out my fan cast of this book. So I picked actresses and actors for Bree, for Nick, for Selwyn, and a lot more. This is kind of just a little extra fun fact about this book. There's a character with locks in the story, and I think a lot of times, because there's limited representation of Black women characters, a lot of times it's important to focus in on like big natural hair, but it's also important for those of us who have locks to see that represented as well. And so I really like to see that in a character. So thank you so much to Tracy Deonn for including that character in this book. Okay, I gotta move on. Can talk about Legendborn for hours. Let's move on. All right, the next book is The Lesson by Cadwell Turnbull. So this book has a super interesting premise. It is the Virgin Islands and it's an alien invasion. So I was like, this sounds great. Unfortunately, it didn't really pan out for me that well. I really enjoyed like the first, maybe like eighth of the book. I loved the setup. The setup was excellent. I love the world building. As you may know from my last Blackathon video, I have Caribbean family, and so I loved being able to see the Virgin Islands in a sci-fi fantasy book. This is pretty solidly sci-fi. There's not really any fantasy here. So my problem was that this book definitely leaned more towards gory and horror, and I don't like horror at all. I can't do it. I don't want to read a bunch of gruesome stuff, and this book definitely did lean towards that, especially in the second half of the book. I also didn't really understand what the lesson was. I read the whole book and I still didn't know what it was. Let's just put it that way. I also had a specific issue with Mira. And in vague terms, I just felt like she had a lot of power, and for as good of a person that she was kind of presenting herself to be, like all this empathy and caring, I feel like there was a lot more that she could have done with all of the power that she had to help out with certain situations, past and present, in this book. So yeah, some people were like, oh, I loved Mira. I did not. I gave that book, I think, like a 3 out of 5 because I did really love the setting and the setup for this book. I also initially did enjoy how it was different perspectives of different characters, but again, it just kind of, to me, the plot just never really got there. Next up was Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. So this book, I believe, was described to me as being like a cute romance, and that's not really what I got from it. It was not a bad book. I did enjoy it, but it was more of an existential crisis. It's got a Groundhog Day setup where there's a repeating time loop. The time loop is like a couple months though, it's not a day. I really enjoyed the parents in this book. I really enjoyed the friendships in this book, but I did not love, there was some moral of the story kind of stuff made about death, the idea of death, that I didn't feel like really tied into what the actual story said. It felt like it was tacked on at the end, something about like people never really die or something like that, and I just feel like that wasn't presented in the actual story until like the very end as kind of like a moral of the story is, and I didn't really like that too much. If you want to go for existential crises with like some cute grand gesture type stuff as well, I definitely recommend this book. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. All right, at this point in my February / late January reads, I had finished the prompts for Blackathon Team Sci-Fi Fantasy, and so now I was just kind of like, I'm gonna read some other stuff. So I read Slay by Brittany Morris, and I loved this book. There is a lot to talk about within this book because I believe she did so many themes around Blackness so well. So first of all, I love the protagonist. Out of all of the books that I read this year, Kira is the most relatable protagonist for me. She is a Black girl who loves fantasy and loves video games. and fantasy video games. And that's me. I also love strategy video games and also cute video games like Animal Crossing, but hey, basically video games. So yeah, I loved Kira. She was great. I also very much related to not wanting to be the resource for non-Black people around you on Blackness, and also could relate to feeling like there was Black people around you who are telling you that your way of being Black is wrong, is not Black enough. So I can relate to her on many different levels. I think that one of the things Brittany Morris absolutely aces in this book is the variability on how to be Black. There are as many ways to be Black as there are Black people. And she doesn't just cover this within American Black people, she covers this over the diaspora. There's also LGBTQ plus Black people. And she talks about differences between generations in Black people. It's very rich. Like, I love seeing the different examples of being Black and what that means to different people. There is a character who has a white parent, and I thought it was very interesting how she didn't really resolve this question, but she did at least like bring up the discussion of how do you interact with Black spaces as a Black person when the people that are closest to you and the people that you love are white. This can be relevant for adopted Black people, biracial Black people, Black people whose just best friends or significant others are white or non-Black. So that was very, very interesting. There's also a Hotep character, and if you don't know what that is, well, I mean, you're lucky, I guess. But I never thought I would see a Hotep character in a fiction book, and it just, again, there is a spectrum of Blackness, very many different ways to be Black. And Brittany Morris did such a great job of showing just the range, because it's like humanity, right? There's no one way to be a person, and there's no one way to be Black. There were some decisions that some of the characters made that were tough, especially regarding police. Again, this is one of those situations where she kind of raised a question, but it was also raised in a way that the reader could see that there's different sides to how this situation could or should be handled. It was just very nuanced. There's a lot of nuance to this book. I loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. Another one of those books where I could go on, but I won't. It was excellent. Let's leave it at that. You should read it. So the last book I read in February was more of a collection of essays, and it was called Nonbinary, Memoirs of Gender and Identity. So like I said before, I'm bisexual and I'm Black. But there are so many different identities in the LGBTQ plus community. There's been so much discourse around transgender identities, and I just want to learn more. Like, I want to hear about it from people who have that identity, let people tell their stories. I feel like it was a very well done collection of essays. The editors were Micah, Rajunov, and Scott Duane. So yeah, I was the only editors / writers that weren't Black out of all the books that I read in February, but there were some essays done by Black people in the book. I thought it was super interesting, and I also very much appreciated that for some of the chapters that had heavier material, they had specific trigger warnings at the beginning of the chapters, so you can know and make that decision of if you're in the place to read material like that. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It was good. People telling their stories, so it wasn't kind of a thing where it's like, oh, I think this character should have been written better. Like, no, it was their story. So nonfiction for you, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it for my February wrap up of the books that I read this month, and also a few from January. Whether they're directly from the Blackathon team's science fiction fantasy prompts or not, I definitely do feel like I read more because of being part of this readathon, and I gained so much as far as new books and new authors that I really love. Like I said, I'll leave the information for Blackathon 2021 in the description because it's always a good time to read books by Black authors. This is my first reading wrap-up video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you thought of the books that I read, if you've read them, and what you liked or disliked about those books. Let me know if you like my booktube content because I've really enjoyed making it. I also make videos on hair, specifically my DIY microlocks. I don't know if you can tell, but I recently interlocked them, and I'm going to be doing a 1-year update very soon. I also do videos on giant cookies or food or music, just pretty much whatever I want to. I don't do a ton of videos. I'm not going to be clogging your newsfeed, so it is safe to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to end it here. I hope to see you around next time.